Hey everybody, welcome to the Lakers Nation podcast. My name is Trevor Lane, and today's show is brought to you by Harry's Razors. Go to harrys.com/Lakers for $5 off a purchase of a fantastic set of razors. Now, for today's show, I've brought in Philadelphia 76ers expert Derek Bodner and Phoenix Suns expert Gerald Borguet. We're going to be mocking the first few picks of the NBA draft, which I think are going to be pretty interesting because we don't know exactly who's going to go where. So we're going to see how things break down as the variables change. Should be a fun one. Let's jump right into it. So today I've got Derek Bodner of DerekBodner.com and Draft Express, who covers the Philadelphia 76ers, as well as Gerald Borguet, who covers the Phoenix Suns for Hoops Habit. Guys, thanks so much for joining the show.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Trevor.
So the idea here is that we're going to kind of go through the draft itself and figure out what each team would do. I'll represent the Lakers, Derek will represent the 76ers, Gerald will represent the Suns, because I think those are three of the most interesting picks in the draft. Of course, everybody's been assuming the Lakers are going to take Lonzo Ball, but we'll take a look and see what may happen if things get switched up a little bit, which, you know, it's sounding more and more like that is a real possibility. So before we dive into that, though, I was curious, Derek, the draft lottery ended up having the Lakers get the second overall pick, which meant that Philadelphia did not get their pick this year. How does Philadelphia feel about this? Are they okay with that because they get the Lakers pick unprotected in 2018, or was it a little bit of a disappointment to not get the pick this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, and I think it's pretty evenly split among the fan base. I think when you look at this draft, there's so much guard depth and perimeter depth, which is what the Sixers really need, that I think a lot of people probably wished it conveyed this year, and I think there's an argument for that. Whereas I think, you know, next year, while it has that chance to be unprotected, in the first year, I mean, this is going on 3 years now, where at first it was top 5 protected. Then the last 2 years it was top 3 protected, right. and the Lakers have some incredible luck in that regard. So this is the first year where it's really going to be unprotected. But it's also in a draft where it's pretty big man heavy. I mean, you have those two at the top, Doncic and Porter. And I think both of those would be reasonable fits, especially Doncic, but Porter too, just from an elite skill level. And then you start getting into some power forward and centers. And so while maybe you can make an argument that the talent at 3 next year will be more talented than what you would have gotten at 4, 5, or 6 this year because of that fit and the number of options you had there. I think a lot of people wanted that to convey. Personally, you know, I'm always a little willing to gamble, and I do think missing out, you know, if that would have conveyed at like 5, you get a guy like Isaac or Monk or someone of that ilk, you could have gotten a real contributor there. But I think I'm a little willing to gamble at the, 10, 15% chance at getting a talent like Doncic. So I'm okay with it, but there are very real back and forths that you can have with that.
Right, and so Philadelphia has got to be just kind of keeping their fingers crossed right now and hoping that the Lakers do hold off on trying to go after anybody like Paul George or somebody like that until the following summer, right?
Oh, sure. And I mean, the way that this whole designated player exception is structured is fascinating because George still has that, whatever chance of becoming an all-NBA player next year. So he's probably going to tell you guys, look, wait, don't do it now.
Right.
I'll come to you guys in free agency or what have you. He'll probably tell other teams I'm not even interested in re-signing with you because he doesn't want to leave Indiana. So I think how that's going to play out over the next 12 months is going to be really fascinating. But yes, you certainly want that delayed at least until the trade deadline next year.
Right. Definitely going to be something to watch. And I know something that Philadelphia fans will be looking at too. Now, Gerald, I know from watching the reaction online, I know Suns fans are disappointed. And what amazed me was that, at least my feeling on it, was that Suns fans were almost as disappointed that the Lakers kept their pick as they were that the Suns dropped back 2 picks. Is that accurate to you? Are you seeing the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when you think about it, this is a fan base that's going into its 50th year as a franchise. They've never won a championship. They've never earned the number 1 overall pick, making them the longest tenured franchise to not do either one. So when you look at the 3 teams that were in front of them when they finished with the second worst record, you've got the Celtics, the Lakers, and the Sixers. A lot of people kind of lost sight of the whole NBA is rigged hot takes kind of thing. I mean, they dived right into that as soon as that happened. The Suns still have a good chance to get a solid contributor and a piece of their rebuild at number 4. But they were definitely looking forward to, snagging the number 2 or possibly even the number 1 pick and getting a point guard that would, maybe make Eric Bledsoe available on the trade market.
Well, it's certainly finding Devin Booker at 13 has got to give the Suns fans at least a little bit of hope, because they know that drafts don't always shake out where the number 1 pick is the best player and the second pick ends up being the second best player. In fact, that's usually not the case.
Right.
So, I mean, there is still that hope for the Suns that, even though they drop back a couple spots, they could still very well find a real talent here. And that's something that we'll look at as we start with this draft. Now, in my opinion, it seems like it's pretty well locked in that the Boston Celtics are going to take Markelle Fultz, right? I mean, are you guys in agreement with that?
If they're smart.
I can't see any way that they don't. Unless, they might trade. Let's put it this way. I think it's pretty locked in that Markelle Fultz is going number 1.
Sure. Yeah, they could end up trading the pick to somebody who wants Fultz at number 1. So he may not end up in Boston, but it seems like a sure thing that Fultz will go first overall. I mean, he's incredible, and there's a lot to like about him. So that pick is sort of anticlimactic in my mind anyway. There's not a whole lot of discussion on it because it's pretty clear that it's going to be Fultz. I mean, yeah, you could say that maybe Lonzo Ball throws his name in there a little bit or something like that, or Josh Jackson, but for the most part, it's going to end up being Fultz. It's just kind of a done deal. Kind of like last year, we knew that Simmons was going to be the first overall pick. Now, I think things are starting to get a little more interesting with the Lakers at number 2. We're starting to hear that there's some division within their front office, that a lot of people do really like Josh Jackson, that De'Aaron Fox's name is getting thrown around there, that it's not just a lock that they're going to go Lonzo Ball. But let's say in this scenario that they do end up going with Lonzo Ball, which does still seem like the most likely outcome. So if the Lakers take Ball at 2, they're going to pair him with D'Angelo Russell. They're going to hope that the offense is going to click with him, and then they're going to try to hopefully work on their defensive side of the court a little bit down the road. So, Derek, what would Philadelphia do in your mind with that third pick if the Lakers end up taking Ball? So Fultz and Ball are off the board.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's been a lot of chatter leading up to the lottery that they were really big on Malik Monk and his fit with the Sixers, specifically because, you're going to have Ben Simmons running a lot of your basically being your point guard while defending that, small forward or power forward spot that frees you up to take more of a non-traditional point guard and a guy who can really shoot from the perimeter. And I think the Sixers were an interesting spot for Monk because he could defend the point. He could play, create his own shot against a point, but he's not really asked to have any of that real shot creation responsibilities for his teammates. But I'm not sure they like him enough to pass on some of the talent that's going to be there. I do think probably if I had to pick the most likely selection that they'll make at 3 right now, it probably is Josh Jackson. But I think they have a lot of work to do because I see a lot of, I look at Fultz and he's in the tier above himself. For the Sixers, I liked Ball number 2 because he can play off the ball as well. He did a lot at UCLA last year with Aaron Holiday, and I think he has some of the skills to work in that regard. And then after that, I see a lot of pieces who are real close in talent level. And I think you have to kind of start taking some fit questions with Ben Simmons into that equation. So I think they're gonna really bring everyone in. I think they're gonna try to bring Fox in and Isaac in and Monk and Tatum and all of that. Right now, I would put Jackson as the favorite, but I'm not sure if it's at the stage where it's a prohibited favorite. I do think that jump shot is a pretty legitimate concern when you're talking about pairing him next to Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I wonder about the fit there with Simmons not being a great jump shooter. Of course, we know Joel Embiid can stretch the floor a bit, as well as Dario Saric, but still, I wonder about that fit with Josh Jackson. Is that the biggest concern in your mind? Is that trying to fit him in with the Sixers' current roster, but his talent level is just high enough to where you just take him anyway and try to make it work? Is that kind of where you're at?
Well, I think what I would say, I think it kind of gets mixed together because it's how can you really define a high upside wing if he can't shoot from the perimeter? Like, I think his upside and his fit with the Sixers is kind of tied hand in hand. I think the way I would say it is that if he does figure out his jump shot, then his talent level is high that it's tough to pass up. But I think there's some risk. I do think if his jump shot never comes around, look, I realize he shot 38% from three-point range. I think it's the most hollow 38% I've seen. I think when you really start looking at some of these, college numbers, how well that's going to translate comes into question because that sample size is so small. So you look at every other indicator, from his form to his consistency to his high school results to his free throw results, and I don't have a whole lot of confidence in that. And I do think both his fit with the Sixers and really his ultimate upside is directly tied to whether or not he can fit that out. So I think, or figure that out. So I think it's a really big concern. I do think if he doesn't figure that out, it could be, he could end up being a little bit underwhelming. But by the same token, I think if he figures that out, he can really, if you're talking about him being a third option and a do-it-all kind of wing, then I think he has a lot of upside.
Right. So the Sixers end up going with Josh Jackson at the third pick, and we'll see if they really do. But in your mind, that would be a good pick, and I think I agree with that. Josh Jackson.
If you're talking just my pure rankings, I actually have Jonathan Isaac for the Sixers ahead of him because I trust his shot a lot more, and his defensive versatility would be insane. I think Jackson is the most likely one, but I think there's a case for Isaac as well.
That's a great point. Jonathan Isaac is one of those guys that could rise up the draft board depending on who's picking. And I think you're right that he really is an excellent fit with the 76ers and what they're trying to do. But you have to wonder, can you really pass up a guy like Josh Jackson being there? That's going to be a tough call. It's going to be a really interesting pick at 3 for the 76ers. Now, Gerald, let's say the 76ers do go ahead and select Josh Jackson. So you've got Josh Jackson, Markelle Fultz, Lonzo Ball all off the board. What the heck do the Suns do at 4 at that point?
That's a tough one because Josh Jackson is kind of the consensus favorite here in the Valley. He's the guy that they would like to have because this is a team that really needs defense. Bledsoe's not this team's long-term point guard with the youth movement. Devin Booker has to make serious strides on that end. They really need a wing that can cover for the defensive deficiencies in that backcourt, and Josh Jackson is kind of that guy that's being pegged right now. So if he's off the board, you've got a couple of different options. You've got Jonathan Isaac, whose defensive versatility would be great, but he's also, there is some risk in that kind of pick, especially since they took 2 front court players in last year's draft that are kind of the same, high upside, but, possible bust territory with Dragon Bender and Marquise Chris. You've also got Jason Tatum, who, this is just me, but I'm not a big fan of his fit here with the Suns just because they already have a wing that can score in bunches, but can't really, his jump shot is not a proven thing yet with TJ Warren. There's also been talks of De'Aaron Fox being, he's been rising through a lot of people's draft boards in this workout process. And, if the Suns believe that he could be a point guard who could replace Bledsoe in the long haul, they might give him a look, and his defense would be something that would be an asset to the Suns. And then they've even worked out Malik Monk just to, do their due diligence, and he's an explosive athlete, a very good shooter. And, the Suns were very gung-ho about, well, you can never have too much shooting. So they would have a couple of different options. My guess would be, I think Jonathan Isaac would be a dark horse for that pick at number 4, but they have a lot of different ways they could lean in this way.
And if push comes to shove, who would you take?
Personally, I would probably take Jonathan Isaac, but they're honestly, they could be a bet to trade down in the draft. I don't think the Kings would be dumb enough to trade the number 5 and the number 10 pick for just to move up one spot. But
never look, as someone who covers the Sixers, you never know.
Exactly. I mean, we say the Sixers or the Kings, they couldn't be dumb enough. But looking back on the DeMarcus Cousins trade, I guess maybe we should rethink that. But yeah, I would go with Isaac if Josh Jackson is off the board. That would be my choice.
Okay. And let's not forget that the Sixers actually have the 3rd pick in the draft this year because of a brilliant pick swap with the Kings that nobody thought would ever actually come into play, but lo and behold, it did, and then the Sixers stayed at the 3rd pick because of it.
Well, and by the way, they still have a 2019 unprotected pick coming from the Kings. Also, they could go out and sign, Marco Bellinelli and Costa Koufos, and I think Rondo too. Yeah, there's look, it never hurts to ask the Kings if they'd be interested. Trust me.
That's right. Oh, poor Vlade. So let's talk about that real quick because that was actually a rumor that came out. I believe it was Chad Ford in his recent mock draft that mentioned that the Kings were considering packaging 5 and 10 in order to ensure that they get De'Aaron Fox. Now, in this in this mock that we just did with Jonathan Isaac going 4th to the Suns, they wouldn't have to move that pick. They could pick up Fox at 5. But let's say, I mean, I would be tempted from the Lakers' perspective to get 5 and 10. I don't know that I'd actually pull the trigger. But Derek, if Vlade calls you up and he says 5 and 10 for 3, do you do it?
Well, and this is one of those big divides because I think a lot of it depends on whether or not you think Josh Jackson or De'Aaron Fox can be, real all-star level talents. Because I think if you believe they can, then you say no. You keep the pick. You ensure that you have a chance of doing that. That being said, I do, as much as I like Josh Jackson's all-around game, I have pretty significant concerns about that jump shot and about what he can ultimately become if that jump shot doesn't come around. So because I have Jonathan Isaac really neck and neck with him, and because I think there's if you trade the 3 pick for 5 and 10, under the presumption that the Kings are then going to use the 3 pick on Fox, someone who I don't think fits with the Sixers because of that shooting, then you're guaranteeing one of Isaac or Jackson is going to be there at 5. So right. I think I would certainly make that trade and put yourself in a position, like I said, get one of Jackson or Isaac, and have a shot of getting one of Monk or Ntilikina or Dennis Smith if one of them falls to 10, which is fairly likely. I think that would be a great outcome for the Sixers. Yes, I would. That
would be an incredible draft for the Sixers if they were able to do that and get 2 top level prospects, especially with one of them being a guard like that. It feels like that team just needs a guard, especially a guard that can shoot the ball. So if they were able to end up with one of the top guards in a very guard heavy draft, plus a guy like maybe Jonathan Isaac or Josh Jackson or whoever is still sitting there, man, that would be a home run.
Yeah, I mean,
Gerald. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to your point about needing a guard, there are people who will vouch for Monk or Dennis Smith Jr. at number 3 because of how much they really need that guard play. So you're absolutely right.
So, Gerald, I'm assuming that if the offer of 5 and 10 was on the board for 4th with where they would take De'Aaron Fox, you'd be all over that, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Suns would be excited to make trading with the Kings on draft day like an annual tradition at this point. They got Marquise Chris last year, and you could, in the Suns headquarters for draft night, you could hear them cheering and clapping in the room above when they got the deal done. I think you would hear a similar reaction this year if they could trade. They'd trade down 1 spot and then they'd pick up another top 10 pick for a team that's restructuring completely around youth. That would be kind of an ideal outcome, especially because that number 4 spot, I mean, if Josh Jackson is off the board, that's something they would definitely look to do.
Okay, so let's talk about Josh Jackson being off the board here. Let's say that things get switched around in Lakerland and that the Lakers decide that Josh Jackson is the way to go. And we have heard that he has some very serious support inside the Lakers front office. There are people who really, really, really like Josh Jackson and are pushing for him. So let's say they get their way. Fultz is off the board at 1 to Boston or whoever he ends up going to, and the Lakers take Josh Jackson at 2. Derek, do you then see Philly going with Lonzo Ball?
I do. And this is,
okay.
A lot of people question how much you take fit in with the draft. And this is one instance where I think I take it in quite a bit because I have some questions about Lonzo Ball as maybe the second best prospect in this draft, mostly based off, the common, what everybody else says in terms of ability to create shots in a half court, his man-to-man defense, his ability to really get to the rim and finish at the rim. Like, I think those are all fairly legitimate concerns. And the jump shot, too, while I think I'm fairly confident in and off the catch, I think there's some natural struggles he's going to have because of his form and his delivery. So I have some questions there, but when you start talking about, I really think his best role might be as a co-ball handler in the half court, and you can minimize some of those weaknesses. You can, kind of really bring his spot-up jump shooting out to the forefront, and I think he does have range out to 24, 25, even 26 feet. So I think he would fit in really, and because he is such a borderline elite cutter for his position at the point guard spot, I think he could be a really good fit. And defensively, his man-to-man defense is bad, and he got really exploited in that Kentucky game. Mm-hmm. But I also think he brings something to the table. Mostly as an off-the-ball defender, he has really good instincts off the ball. He can jump passing lanes, get out in transition, where he and Ben Simmons would be an absolute blast to watch. And I think because of his size at 6'6", you can kind of hide him a little bit easier than you can some of these other point guard prospects. You can essentially pick the opponent's weakest perimeter player and stick him on there and let him kind of play like a free safety role. So I think if you have two real elite passers like Simmons and Simmons and Ball, and you have Ball who can stretch the floor a little bit, and then you have all that transition pushing. That would be very tough for me to pass up.
Yeah, that would be a very exciting team. I'm just imagining that ball just pinging around the Sixers offense like crazy.
Yeah.
It would just be ball movement to the max degree, right? I mean, it would be impressive, and so I think that that Philadelphia certainly wouldn't pass on Ball, which is, if you've seen the latest report from Chad Ford, they're saying that he's saying that Phoenix really is hoping that Ball will somehow fall to them at 4, that was who they really wanted. But obviously in this scenario, it wouldn't happen. Now, Gerald, I'm assuming Phoenix would still go Jonathan Isaac because the same 3 guys would be off the board, right?
Yeah, I would say Jonathan Isaac would still be the pick there. And they were, I think, I also read that report about Ball. That would be probably, other than Jackson falling to number 4, that would probably be their second most coveted player, just realistically, But because they, like I said, they need that point guard of the future. Eric Bledsoe's 27, 28, and he's, his history of injuries is not comforting. Like, this would be the time to look to move him coming off a career year. They rested him down the stretch, but it wasn't because he was hurt or anything like that. So I think at number 4, if Ball and Jackson were still off the board, they would stick with Isaac. But, again, they have so many different directions they could go with that pick.
So would you say that if just say in a vacuum, if both Ball and Jackson were on the board for them, they would take Jackson?
That's a tough one. I think
it is close.
Yeah, I think they would go Ball. But in terms of realistically who's going to be available, Jackson's probably number 1 on their draft board.
And let's say that the Sixers the Suns do end up going with De'Aaron Fox. Let's say they take a point guard. Would we then assume that, or maybe they go Dennis Smith Jr. or whoever, but would we then assume that Bledsoe is immediately on the block?
Yeah, I would assume that, yeah. I mean, McDonough said on draft lottery night when the pick fell to 4 that he hoped that this happening would kind of take Eric Bledsoe's name out of the trade rumors, and because a lot of people were already speculating if they did secure a top 2 pick, what would happen with Bledsoe's future. And he's been very adamant about saying that Bledsoe is their guy, that he does a lot for the team in the locker room and organizing off-season workouts and in the community and all that kind of stuff. But, realistically, if they got a point guard that they believe could be their guy moving forward with this young core of Devin Booker and Dragon Bender and Marquise Chris, I mean, they would have to put him on the trade block. It would only make sense.
So let's switch this around one more time, and let's say that in this third scenario, we know Magic Johnson was there live to watch De'Aaron Fox eviscerate Lonzo Ball when Kentucky took on UCLA in the tournament. And he's somewhat enamored with Fox from that. Let's say that the Lakers really surprise everyone and they take Fox with this second overall pick. Fultz, again, is still off the board. So Philly, you would likely go Ball still, right?
Yeah, I would. I will say one thing about that Kentucky game.
Yeah.
De'Aaron Fox was defended by a lot. I went back and I rewatched every point he scored. He only scored, I think, maybe about 14 points on Lonzo Ball. So I think that was really a group effort. I think as bad as Ball's on-ball defense is, I think he maybe gets a little too much blame for the outcome of that game. But, yes, going back to your original point, and I only say that because I literally rewatched that yesterday. Going back to your original point, yeah, I think Lonzo Ball's the choice at 3.
Okay, so now Josh Jackson then would fall to Phoenix, and that would be the dream scenario for the Suns, right, Gerald?
Yeah, they'd probably scoop him up in a heartbeat.
Okay, so interesting draft because we've got so many different possible outcomes, and it all kind of just hinges on what the team before you does. And of course, as you project out further in the draft, then it gets harder and harder to lock down these picks and figure out who's going to do what. But this is really the fun part of the draft, is just watching teams react to other teams and how they're going to figure things out. Of course, we know there's tons of smoke screens out there right now. You don't want anybody really knowing what you're going to do because then they can take advantage of you. Like let's see, wasn't it Derek? I believe it was the Sixers a few years ago were able to get the Orlando Magic on the whole Elfrid Payton deal. I think they picked up an extra first out of that, right?
They did, all because they knew that Orlando really coveted Payton, and they took that gamble. They made that selection of taking Peyton at 10 before they even had that trade worked out. So yeah, doing your due diligence and trying to really figure out what other teams' desires are can certainly give you some positive reward.
So that's why you see so many different rumors going around this time of year. Of course, you also get agents that are throwing in their 2 cents and they're trying to get their prospect, higher up on draft boards or trying to get them to certain teams and all that kind of stuff. So this is a really fun time of year in terms of rumors and all that, but it can be really tough to get an accurate read on exactly what is going to happen. I think we all wait, in somewhat anticipation for that pick to finally be announced, or I guess actually over the last few years we're all waiting for Woj to tweet it out like 2 minutes before it actually gets announced, right?
Yeah. It's so funny watching. We just had the NFL draft in Philadelphia. It's so funny watching that because there's like that agreement where they don't tweet it out, and it just seems so foreign to me after the last couple of years of just waiting for Woj. I mean, if there's one day where I tend to have Woj on mobile notifications anyway, but certainly on draft night, he is there's really no reason to watch anything else.
So one of the questions that I had before we wrap this up here and everything is I was looking at the in preparation for the show, I was looking at the rosters of the Suns and the Sixers, and I'm really curious here, Derek. Opening night this coming season, opening night 2017, is Okafor still on the roster?
I can't imagine he is. I mean, if really for both parties' interest, I mean, I know Jahlil wants to be in a spot where he has a little bit more long-term certainty. I think everybody can look at the roster and see Joel Embiid and see what he's going to become and realize that, Okafor doesn't really have a place next to him. And I think he sees that as well. He's been mostly a good soldier in terms of dealing with that inconsistent playing time over the last 2 years. But I think Brian Colangelo is going to have to come to an honest realization of what he's going to be able to command in a trade, and I think it is time to move on, yeah.
What do you think a realistic expectation is for a trade for Okafor at this stage?
I mean, I think at this point he's probably a throw-in. I don't know if you're really going to move the needle in terms of him really adding value to a trade. If you could get a late first-round pick for him, I'd be relatively surprised. There's too many big men, there's too much uncertainty with his health over the last 2 years, and there's too little defense having been played.
See, I still hear people in LA who think that, and I think these are maybe people who haven't been watching the game quite as much, but people are saying, the Lakers should have taken Okafor in 2015
really?
Instead of D'Angelo Russell. Yeah, and a part of that is that D'Angelo Russell is very polarizing. There's some people that love him, some people that hate him. But so if theoretically the Lakers called up the Sixers and said, hey, number 28 for Okafor, that would be done deal in your mind?
I mean, it would be kind of like you have to really resign yourself to the fact that I don't see any way where Okafor is going to recoup value in Philadelphia. Like, even if he can turn his career around, I don't see how he's going to be able to do that while keeping everybody happy on this roster. Right. I would move him at this point just to move him. I'm not sure what the Sixers are necessarily looking for, but I would be surprised if they have any leverage to really command much more than that.
It'll definitely be something to watch. Now, Gerald, the Suns are in an interesting spot too, where they've got tons of young talent, but then they also have these veterans like Tyson Chandler, like Jared Dudley, like, of course, Bledsoe. What are your thoughts? Do you see them making a move before the start of the year to clear out some of these veterans and just fully go with the youth movement, or do you keep these guys around as mentors to the young guys?
I think the Suns will probably keep them around unless they, somehow land a Ball or someone they believe is a franchise point guard. I think they'll keep them around until maybe the trade deadline. Tyson Chandler didn't want to be traded at last year's deadline, and the front office was very direct with him, asking if, he's in the later stages of his career. This is usually the time when guys start taking less money to contend for titles or at least make the playoffs. And he said he wanted to stick around. He grew close to the young guys in the locker room, and he was enjoying his mentor role. But at exit interviews, the question was brought up again, like, are you still happy here? And he said he would take the summer to reevaluate where things are. And, he said he was kind of looking for a couple of roster tweaks that would make it worth his while to stick around, like adding a couple of veterans. And that's not really in the Suns' MO right now. So I think around the trade deadline is when you might see a Tyson Chandler or even an Eric Bledsoe moved if this team is going to trade them. Because they do need that veteran touch. A few seasons ago, that was really lacking in their locker room. So Ryan McDonough knows that these youngsters need some guidance. but those contracts would be more useful elsewhere at this point.
So if you see, like, say, Chandler get traded, or if you see Bledsoe get traded, then it's likely that the other one will follow not too much down the road, right?
It's possible. I mean, the Suns definitely love Bledsoe. I think Chandler is kind of a guy that would be able to help a team that needs front court depth. With Bledsoe, there's the question of whether he can stay healthy. There's the question of whether the Suns have a replacement. They really do like Tyler Ulis. But it's unclear at this point if he is best served as a high-energy guy off the bench, or if he can actually be, the next sort of undersized Isaiah Thomas. So I think Bledsoe sticks around for longer than most Suns fans would like, since his trade value is about as high now as it's ever going to get. But I think Chandler could be moved within the next year.
Let me ask you, as somebody who, because the Sixers are so in need of a point guard, his name gets brought up a lot. Mm-hmm. Would he be the point guard of the future if it wasn't for the injury? Like, would you be willing to go forward with his contract and his age if he was a little more certain in terms of his availability?
I think so. I think a lot of Suns fans get caught up in looking ahead to the future as far as this young core, because Devin Booker's going to turn 21 in October. Dragan Bender and Marquise Chris are still like teenagers. So with Bledsoe being 28, a lot of his game, a lot of his effectiveness is based on his athleticism. He's a little turnover prone. He's not the best outside shooter or playmaker exactly. So for them, I mean, they're kind of looking ahead like, Bledsoe's value is high. We need to move him now, sort of thing. By the time that this team is ready to, compete and start making the playoffs again, I'm not sure how effective Bledsoe will be at that point. So that's probably the reasoning there. Other than that, I think I think he's a good influence on this locker room. It's just by the time that this team is ready to, start making waves again, he might be on the downturn.
He's just so interesting because when you think of him, like in my mind, he's only really been a regular starter for 4 years. So I think in my mind, he's younger than 27, 28, when in reality, he took a little bit to get to that point because of that Clippers years.
Right, and that's, you couple that with the injuries, like he's kind of like the lost star in this whole Suns turmoil ever since Steve Nash left. Like, he's been really good, all-star caliber numbers if you just look at the numbers, but his team, and he's never been a guy who can lead your team to the playoffs, and he hasn't had a lot of help, obviously, but he's a very interesting case because he could be great on a very good team, but just here he's kind of the guy who puts up numbers on very lackluster teams.
Right.
So if you were to trade Eric Bledsoe, let's say you were to trade him, I mean, it seems like there would be a decent fit there with Philadelphia. What would the Suns be looking for in return if they were having trade conversations with the Sixers?
Probably a first rounder at some point. That might be a little optimistic, but I mean, McDonough did squeeze a first rounder out of Markieff Morris back a few years ago when the Markieff Morris drama was at its peak. So they'd probably try and get a first round pick or a young player in any sort of Bledsoe deal. Just keep adding assets to the stockpile that he's got going.
Do you need a back to the basket traditional big man by chance?
It's that Okafor name has been brought up a lot in the Suns over the last few months, and most people here would not be thrilled about that, I think.
Oh no, you shouldn't be. You shouldn't. Yeah, it's interesting. The Sixers are kind of an interesting spot because I think they're going to improve a little bit more than most people expect. And they have those two really high value picks in terms of the Lakers, depending on what they're able to do in the summer and through trades and whatnot. And also that Kings pick in 2019. So I think they're a little more willing to maybe gamble on their own first round picks in the future. Because I think you look at it when Joel Embiid was on the court, this was not a really bad team last year. In fact, they were, in terms of just not the games he played, but when he was on the court, they were the best defense in the league. So I think some people are looking at maybe the 2018, 2019 Sixers picks as maybe being a little overvalued in terms of trades. I wonder if maybe they'll try to include that in some kind of deal because they do have the Lakers and the Kings pick to fall back on.
So do you see the Sixers as being at a point right now where they'd be ready to make a win now move, or is that still maybe a year down the road?
I think they're going to go out and try do something relatively big in free agency, whether that's a guy like Kyle Lowry or a guy like, JJ Redick. Like, those are two of the names that have been brought up. I do think they're going to pursue a veteran at a pretty big cost, because I do think they want to improve this thing quicker than maybe the pace was in the past.
Hey, before we get out of here, I'm curious. The Sixers obviously took the whole tanking experiment to a whole new level, and now we've seen Sixers fans raising a banner to Sam Hinkie, and I thought that was just one of the coolest moments of the whole pre-draft lottery phase and everything. What's your take on all that, on the way Sixers fans have just embraced this whole process?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, I think a couple things. First of all, this team hasn't had anything to be excited about, or the fans haven't had anything to be excited about since 2001. That's a long time, and really before then, you'd have to go back to the early 90s when Charles was still kind of before he got disgruntled with the organization. So there's been kind of two oases of excitement in a really long period of time, 25, 30 years period of time. And the way I kind of say it is Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons are the two best prospects this organization has drafted, since Charles Barkley. And you think about that, and that sounds insane because that was so long ago, but I really do believe that to be true. Two of the three, to be clear, I said including AI in that group. So, right. I think part of what made those fans so rabid is how rabid the other side of the argument was. Like, there was a very heated push from the other side of the argument that didn't like what the Sixers were doing. And I think because of how passionate both sides were, it kind of made each side a little bit more passionate. And I think now that these Sixers fans are starting to see a little bit of reward from, those 3 years of pretty blatant tanking, now that they're sitting there, they know that Joel Embiid, if he's healthy, can really become, one of the best players in this league. They're confident in Ben Simmons when he comes back that he's going to add value. And they're looking at things like the Kings picking, the Lakers picking this pick, and you're starting to see maybe a real window here where you can start envisioning this thing coming together. I think that's probably made them a little bit more outspoken in their support of it. But it really is just because both sides, it almost became political in nature, where it's a reaction to the other side as much as it is, not to saying that they don't believe in what they're saying, but maybe the venom in that message has gotten a little bit more because of how they've gone, really fought against each other. It's been an interesting dynamic. It's been a fun team to cut for a bad team. It's been as fun as you could hope for.
I'd have to imagine that. I mean, Gerald, you can sort of understand where we're coming from here, and that the Suns have been a tough team to cover lately. The Lakers have been tough. I mean, the Lakers fans are always rabid, and so you see Sixers fans getting super excited over draft picks and stuff like that. And in the Lakers fan base, you have some people that are on that sort of track. And then you have a number of people who are just saying, oh, if they're losing, I'm not interested, and they only want to see a winning team. Is the Suns fan base kind of experiencing the same thing, or are they kind of embracing the tank?
They definitely embrace the tank down the stretch of the season, but not to the extent of, like in Philly, where it was a reason to be excited, and they had a whole martyr like Sam Hinkie to idolize now after the fact. Down here, it's more like this is a fair weather sports city. Like, there are a lot of people from other colder, bigger cities around the country, so it's not as passionate a fan base as you would like from such a large city. Philadelphia fans are renowned for their passion. Phoenix fans are renowned for showing up when the team is good, and the team hasn't been good since Steve Nash left. This is a franchise-long, 7-year playoff drought. 50 years without a championship. So it's been very hard to cover this team because the guys in the locker room know it too. Like, if the Lakers or the Celtics or the Bulls or another big team are in town, when the other team comes out for warm-ups, the cheers are louder for that team than for the Suns, because most of the fans show up 2 minutes before game time. So it's not a great situation here right now. There is a lot of excitement over Devin Booker and, rebuilding from the ground up like McDonough was trying to do when he originally got here. But the success of that 2013-14 team kind of doomed them a little bit because they were too good to tank, but they weren't quite good enough to make the playoffs. So they've been kind of stuck in that build from the middle territory, and now there is excitement that they're going about it through the draft and through youth. It's just going to take some time and a lot more patience from a fan base that is not notoriously patient anyway.
No Ryan McDonough banners hanging from the Raptors of Sports Bars?
Not in time. I think Alex Len panning out would have helped in that regard.
I think the Lakers are in the same boat. You know, I don't know who their tank commander would be. Maybe Byron Scott with his arms folded. They could raise a banner of that or something like that. But yeah, I mean, hey, we've got 3 franchises here that are all hoping to add the next big piece on draft day, which is June 22nd, and all hoping to no longer be sitting on the bottom looking up at the rest of these teams. But it's certainly interesting the way the NBA has kind of evolved to where even if you're one of the worst teams in the league, you still kind of have something to root for, which I believe, Gerald, you and I talked about the last time you were on the show, is that you've got this whole different subculture now of this tank idea that has come around, and in some ways it's exciting. You know, like I said earlier, it's like this time of year is almost like our playoffs now, because our teams aren't in the playoffs, and so now we get to focus on the draft and all these different things that could be happening. So it's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, you've got a team out there like the Celtics who got to enjoy the playoffs and the draft, but whatever.
We can all find our own Billy Kings.
Yeah. So anyway, hey, I want to say thank you guys, both Derek Bodner and Gerald Borguet, for coming on the show here. Really appreciate it, guys. Before you get out of here, do you guys have anything that you want to mention? Any big projects coming up or anything you want to plug?
No, I mean, it's most of my stuff at this time of year is Philadelphia 76ers related. So I'm not sure how much overlap there is in that audience, but certainly if you want to follow at Derek Bodner NBA. But I'm not sure I have anything necessarily big coming up. Just a lot of articles on how these 7 or 8 prospects fit with the Sixers.
Yeah, same on my end. You can find all my stuff on Hoops Habit and at Gerald Borguet on Twitter. Should be a lot of good draft coverage on Hoops Habit on June 22nd, but other than that, nothing too big.
All right. Well, hey, both those guys are excellent follows on Twitter and follow their work online. Definitely appreciate you guys coming on. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Sure thing. Thanks, Trevor.
So again, that was Gerald Borguet of Hoops Habit and Derek Bodner of DerekBodner.com, as well as Draft Express. Definitely a great conversation with them, breaking down what happens or what could happen in the NBA draft, which is coming up on June 22nd. That's going to wrap things up for today. I should be back midweek with another show. You can find this show on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, the CLNS radio app, and of course, LakersNation.com. My name is Trevor Lane, and this has been the Lakers Nation Podcast.